Life is full of contradictions, isn't it? We are born into a world that promises so much happiness, success, fulfillment, but along the way we encounter something else: disappointment, frustration, loss. No one is exempt from this. Each of us at some point has faced a moment where we felt the sting of something missing, something broken. Perhaps it was a dream that crumbled in your hands, a relationship that unraveled, or a deep-seated fear that no matter how hard you try, you will always fall short of what you hope to be. Now, why is that? Why, no matter how hard we work or how much we try, does life still seem to slip through our fingers at times? Why, when we reach a certain point, perhaps you finally got the promotion or the house or the family you always wanted, does that deep, unsettling ache remain? If we're honest with ourselves, we know this feeling all too well. It's as if no matter how good things are, there's always a part of us that is still unfulfilled. Some might say, well, that's just life. And perhaps you've heard those who try to dismiss it altogether. This is the way things are, and you just have to deal with it. But that doesn't quite sit right, does it? There's something in us that longs for more, something deeper, something better. We want wholeness, and when we don't find it, we wonder why. Could it be that the very fact we feel this longing points to a greater reality? What if our dissatisfaction, our longing for things to be made right, isn't something to suppress or ignore, but something to listen to? Could it be that this longing, this yearning for wholeness, is woven into the fabric of who we are for a reason? Imagine, if you will, a child who is given a beautiful toy, but the toy is broken. It looks wonderful on the outside, but it doesn't quite work. The child doesn't just sit there and say, oh, well, this is good enough. No, they want it to be fixed. They want it to work as it was intended. In the same way, you and I look at our lives, at the world around us, and we know deep down something is off. We want it to be restored to its original design, don't we? That's why we feel this restlessness when things are incomplete. We weren't made for brokenness. Now think about that for a moment. What does it say about us as human beings that we all share this longing? It's universal, isn't it? No matter where you're from, what your background is, or what you believe, this sense of something's missing is something we all know. Even in moments of great success, we still sense there's more. Have you ever wondered why that is? It's as if there's a voice deep inside each of us whispering, this isn't the end of the story. There's something greater, something beyond what you can see right now. And so we keep searching, don't we? We keep striving, hoping that one day that longing will be met. But what if I told you that this longing isn't a sign of failure or defeat? What if I told you that it's actually a sign of something far more profound? That there is, in fact, something greater at work beneath the surface? Think about it. Would we really feel the ache for restoration, for things to be made right, if that possibility didn't exist? Does a hunger for food not point to the existence of nourishment? You see, I believe, and perhaps you've felt this too, that this longing we all have, this feeling that things should be better, points to something beyond this world. It's not just a quirk of human psychology. It's a signal, a hint, if you will, that we are made for more than just survival in a broken world. We are made for wholeness, for restoration, and for the kind of life where things are not just patched up, but truly made new. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. What if the very reason we experience loss and disappointment is not to crush us, but to awaken us to this deeper reality? What if the purpose of our struggles isn't just to endure them, but to reveal to us that there's something greater waiting? When we lose something valuable, we don't just move on, do we? We grieve because we know it wasn't meant to be that way. We know deep down that restoration is possible. Think about your own life. Have there been moments where you thought everything was falling apart only to realize later on that something unexpected was being set in motion? Perhaps a door closed in your life and it felt like the end of the road, but then another door opened, leading you somewhere you never imagined. Isn't it curious how, in retrospect, what seemed like a disaster often turns out to be part of a larger plan? So what if the pain, the frustration, the loss you've experienced isn't the final word? What if, just beneath the surface, something is being restored? What if the very thing that feels broken in your life right now is part of a much grander process? one that's leading you not to despair, but to wholeness. It's easy to become discouraged when we face difficulties, when we encounter yet another setback or loss. But let me encourage you to look at those moments differently. Could they be an invitation to trust that something greater is at work? Could they be pointing us to the fact that this world, as it is not the final chapter, but only a prelude to something more? There's a sense in which every frustration we encounter is like a reminder that things aren't finished yet. It's like a subtle tap on the shoulder saying, wait, this isn't how the story ends. And if that's true, then what we are experiencing now is not meant to be the defining feature of our lives. Restoration is coming. It's woven into the very fabric of existence. So I ask you, why does your heart long for something beyond the present? Could it be that this longing is a gift, a signal that something greater is at work? Could it be that, in ways we can't yet fully understand, everything broken will be restored, and that the ache you feel now is a sign that restoration is not only possible, but certain? I remember speaking to someone who had spent their whole life building a successful business from the ground up. They had everything: wealth, prestige, influence. From the outside, it looked like they had the... But when I asked them if they were happy, they paused. And after a long silence, they said, "It's funny. I thought getting here would be the answer. But now that I'm here, it doesn't feel the way I thought it would." Now, I don't tell you this to discourage you from working hard or pursuing your dreams. Those things have great value. But I tell you this to highlight something we often overlook. The fact that our deep sense of wanting more isn't solved by simply getting more of the things we're used to chasing. The truth is, we're not longing for something that can be bought or earned. We're longing for something deeper. And this is where it gets interesting. What if that longing, that ache, isn't there to frustrate us but to guide us? What if it's pointing us to something beyond this world? Think of it like this. When you're thirsty, the thirst itself is a sign that water exists, right? It wouldn't make sense for us to feel thirsty if there were no such thing as water. In the same way, perhaps our longing for wholeness is a sign that true wholeness exists, somewhere, somehow, beyond what we currently experience. Maybe you've never thought about it that way before. But isn't it possible that this longing is there to remind us that we are made for something more? That we are not just meant to scrape by, to survive with bits and pieces of happiness, but that we are designed for a fuller, richer life? What if that's what the ache is about? What if this ache, this incompleteness, isn't just about us individually, but about the world as a whole? We look around and see brokenness everywhere. In relationships, in communities, in the world at large. There's division, conflict, suffering. And if you're like me, you've probably thought to yourself, it's not supposed to be this way. That thought, that gut reaction is telling. It suggests that we know deep down that things should be different. So what does that tell us? It tells us that the longing for wholeness isn't just a personal feeling. It's a universal truth. It's as if the whole of creation is groaning, waiting for restoration, for something to make things right again. And we, as part of that creation, feel it too. Every time we experience loss or disappointment, every time we look at our lives or the world and feel that something is missing, it's like a reminder that this world, as it is not the end of the story. Now, you might be wondering, what am I supposed to do with this longing? If nothing in this world can truly satisfy it, then what's the point? And that's a fair question. But here's the thing. This longing isn't meant to leave us feeling defeated. It's meant to awaken us to something greater. It's meant to remind us that we're part of a much bigger story, one that is still unfolding. Think about it like this. When you're watching a movie and the characters are going through difficult times, you don't walk out of the theater halfway through because things look bleak. No, you stay because you know that the story isn't finished yet. You know, there's more to come. And that's exactly what our lives are like. The story isn't over. The longing for wholeness that we all feel is there to remind us that restoration is coming, that things are not yet as they should be, but they will be. So the next time you feel that ache, that sense that something is missing, don't ignore it. Don't try to numb it with distractions or settle for temporary fixes. Instead, listen to it. Let it remind you that you are made for more. And take comfort in the fact that this longing is not a sign of failure, but of hope. It's a sign that we are not yet finished, and neither is the world around us. We are all longing for wholeness, and that's a good thing. It means that restoration is possible, and not just possible, it's promised. The H we feel now is simply the echo of a future reality, one where everything broken will be made whole and everything lost will be restored. Loss and brokenness are strange things, aren't they? No matter who you are or where you come from, there's no escaping them. At some point, you're going to lose something or someone that matters to you. And it's going to hurt. You've probably felt it already in your life, haven't you? Maybe it was the breakdown of a relationship you thought would last forever, or perhaps you've had a dream you were chasing slip right through your hands. It could even be something less obvious, the slow drifting away of someone you love, or the disappointment of a goal that, once achieved, didn't feel the way you thought it would. The truth is, loss is a part of living. It's woven into the fabric of our existence. And yet, even though it's universal, we still find it shocking when it comes. We fight against it. We try to avoid it sometimes at all costs. But here's the question. Why does everything feel so fragile, so temporary, so easily lost? Why is it that no matter how hard we work to hold on to things, whether it's success, wealth, relationships, or even happiness, life has a way of reminding us that none of it is truly ours to keep? Think about it. You spend years working toward a promotion, and when you finally get it, there's a moment of elation. But it doesn't last, does it? Soon, the excitement wears off, and you find yourself looking for the next. Or maybe you've poured your heart into building a life with someone only to watch it fall apart over time despite your best efforts. It's frustrating, isn't it? It can feel like no matter what we do, everything in life is slipping through our fingers. So what do we do in response? We try to fill the void with distractions, don't we? We turn to success or wealth or relationships, hoping they will make us feel complete again. Some of us try to stay constantly busy, as if keeping our minds occupied will somehow numb the pain of loss. Others throw themselves into work, hoping that if they achieve enough, the emptiness will disappear. Still others turn to relationships, believing that if they can find the right person, everything will be fixed. But no matter what we try, the H remains. Why? Why do we keep feeling this way, despite our best efforts to fill the gaps? Could it be that we're looking for fulfillment in all the wrong places? Could it be that we're trying to fix something that wasn't meant to be patched up with temporary solutions? What if things are broken for a reason? What if the fragility of life isn't a mistake, but a message? Could it be that the very fact that everything feels so temporary is there to awaken something deeper in us, something we wouldn't otherwise notice? If life were perfect, if everything stayed just the way we wanted it to, would we ever feel the need for something beyond it? If nothing ever broke, if we never experienced loss, would we ever stop and think there must be more than this? I remember talking to someone who had lost nearly everything they valued. They were successful, accomplished, and had built a life that many would envy. But when everything came crashing down, when they faced the loss of a business, a marriage, and their health, all at once, something shifted. They said to me, it wasn't until I lost everything that I realized I had been holding on to the wrong things all along. That's a profound realization, isn't it? The idea that sometimes it's in the breaking that we finally see clearly. Now, I'm not saying that brokenness is easy or that loss doesn't matter. Of course it matters. It hurts deeply, and the pain is real. But what if that pain, that sense of everything falling apart, is actually a doorway to something greater? What if it's not the end of the story, but the beginning? You see, when we lose something we care about, we grieve because we were never meant to experience that kind of loss. We were created for wholeness, for connection, for things to be complete. And when we lose something, that's why it feels so unnatural. Deep down, we know that things aren't supposed to be this way, but instead of seeing that as a dead end, what if we saw it as a clue? A clue that there's more to life than what we're seeing right now? Think of it like this. If everything in life is temporary and fragile, maybe that's not a sign of failure, but a sign that we're meant to look beyond what this world can offer. Maybe brokenness is there to remind us that nothing in this world is permanent for a reason, because we weren't made for a temporary world. We were made for something greater, something eternal. But of course, that's easier said than done, isn't it? When we're in the middle of loss, it can be hard to see anything beyond the pain. It's difficult to believe that brokenness could have any purpose. But take a moment and think about your own experiences. Has there ever been a time when, after a season of loss or frustration, something unexpected came out of it? Maybe it was a new opportunity, a relationship that deepened in ways you never imagined, or even a personal strength you didn't know you had. Sometimes it's only after we go through the breaking that we see things more clearly. What if our frustrations and grief aren't there to defeat us, but to point us toward a deeper truth? What if they're like signposts saying, look beyond what's in front of you? Could it be that loss is there to remind us that this world as it is will never fully satisfy us because it was never meant to? Now, I'm not suggesting that we simply accept brokenness and give up. Far from it. What I'm suggesting is that we recognize loss for what it is, a temporary reality in a much bigger picture. The pain you feel, the things that break are real, but they're not the final word. In fact, they might just be the starting point of something far more beautiful. Think of a seed. In order for a plant to grow, the seed first has to be buried in the ground. It has to be broken open before life can emerge from it. It's a process that looks like destruction, but in reality, it's the beginning of something. In the same way, the brokenness we experience might feel like the end, but it could be the very thing that allows new life to emerge. So as we think about our own losses, our own frustrations, let's not rush to fill the void with fleeting solutions. Let's resist the urge to distract ourselves with temporary fixes. Instead, let's sit with the brokenness for a moment and ask ourselves, what if this is happening to awaken something deeper in me? What if this is the start of a restoration I can't yet see? And remember, brokenness is never the end of the story. It's not meant to leave us in despair. It's meant to open our eyes to a greater reality, a reality where restoration is possible, where everything that is lost can be redeemed. So when you face loss, don't see it as a defeat. See it as a reminder that the story isn't over. Something greater is being set in motion even in the midst of the brokenness. Loss is part of our experience, yes, but it's not the final part. The ache you feel now, the frustration, the grief, those things are real, but they are not the end. They are simply the beginning of something greater, something whole. And when we begin to see brokenness in this light, we can face it not with despair, but with hope, because we know that even in the breaking, something beautiful is coming to life. So we've talked about the ache we all feel, the longing for something more, the reality of loss, the fragility of everything around us. And you might be thinking, all right, I get that things are broken, but where does that leave us? What hope do we have if everything can be taken away, if even the things we cherish the most don't last? That's the question, isn't it? After all, it's one thing to understand that life is full of brokenness, but it's quite another to figure out what to do with that knowledge. What do we do when we're standing in the ruins of what we thought was secure? Where do we go when it feels like everything has crumbled around us? I want to offer you this thought. It's what if, in the very midst of the brokenness, there's a promise of restoration? What if loss isn't the final word? What if, just as every seed must break before it can grow, there's something greater at work in our lives even when we can't see it? You see, here's the thing about restoration. It rarely looks the way we expect it to. In fact, if we're honest, it often comes from the very places we thought would undo us. How many times have you looked back on a difficult season in your life and realized that the thing you thought would break you actually became the catalyst for something new? Maybe it didn't happen immediately. Maybe it took time. But isn't it remarkable how healing and renewal often sneak in through the back door, catching us by surprise? There's a subtle, almost hidden hand at work in these moments. It's as if when everything is falling apart, there's something or someone quietly putting the pieces back together in ways we never imagined. Think about how many times have you been surprised by joy, even after heartache? How many times has something you've lost eventually led you to something even more beautiful, even more fulfilling than you could have planned for yourself? Now, I'm not suggesting that everything painful immediately turns into something good, or that all suffering has an easy silver lining. Life is more complicated than that. But what I am suggesting is that there's a pattern here, a rhythm woven into the fabric of existence that suggests something greater than chance. It's as though even when we're walking through the hardest of times, there's an undercurrent of grace pulling us toward restoration, often in ways we can't see until much later. Perhaps the most difficult thing about waiting for restoration is the feeling that nothing is happening. It can feel like being stuck, like God is silent, like all the prayers, all the hope, all the trust is falling into an empty void. But here's the thing, you can't see the progress doesn't mean it's not there. Think of the roots of a tree which grow deep into the earth before you ever see the first green shoot. The work is happening, but it's happening in a way that isn't immediately visible. And sometimes that's exactly what God is doing in your life. So why does restoration take time? Why doesn't God just heal everything right away? Because true restoration isn't a patch job. It's not about putting a quick bandage over a deep wound. It's about healing the wound completely. And that takes time, time for things to settle, time for things to grow, time for the new to take root and flourish. It's a process. And sometimes that process involves what we might call painful pruning. If you've ever tended to a garden, you'll know what I mean. There comes a point where if you want the plant to grow properly, you have to prune it. You have to cut away the dead parts, sometimes even the healthy parts, to make space for new growth. It seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? Why would you cut something that looks perfectly fine? But the gardener knows that without pruning, the plant can't reach its full potential. It will remain stunted, tangled, unable to flourish. And so it is with us. Sometimes the things we hold on to, our plans, our desires, even our comforts, need to be pruned away to make space for something greater. This is not easy. It can feel like a setback. It can feel like loss. But what if that painful pruning is actually part of the restoration process? What if God, in His infinite wisdom, is shaping us, cutting away the things that will only hold us back from the fullness of life He intends for us? What if, in the waiting, we are being prepared for something far better than we could imagine? It's hard to see it when we're in the middle of it. It's hard to trust that something good is coming when all we can feel is the pain of the pruning. But remember, just because you don't see immediate results doesn't mean that nothing is happening. The gardener knows what he's doing, even when we don't understand it. And this is where faith comes in. Not blind optimism, not pretending everything is fine when it's not, but a deep, steady trust that the one who began the work of restoration will finish it. Faith that God sees the whole picture, even when we only see a small part of it. Faith that He is working for our good, even when it feels like nothing is happening. And here's the thing. He's not just working to restore what was lost. He's working to make something new, something better, something that will last. So as you wait for restoration, whether it's the healing of a relationship, the fulfillment of a dream, or the mending of a broken heart, remember this. God's ways are not our ways, but they are always good. His timing may be different from ours, but it is always perfect. And His restoration, when it comes, will be greater than anything we could have planned or imagined. Stay open. Stay hopeful. So now that we've considered what restoration is and how it often unfolds in ways we don't expect, the question naturally arises, how do we live while waiting? What does it look like to live in expectation when the world around us feels broke? To sit back passive and indifferent, simply hoping that something will change? Or is there a way to live that actively prepares us for the restoration God promises? I suspect that many of us wrestle with this very question. Waiting isn't easy. It's uncomfortable, uncertain, and at times deeply. When we find ourselves in those dark moments of life where the restoration hasn't yet come, when the relationship remains fractured, when the dream is still unfulfilled, when the healing hasn't arrived, it's tempting to either lose hope or to take matters into our own hands. But perhaps there is another way to wait, a way that is both active and full of faith. You see, waiting for restoration isn't about doing nothing. It's not about sitting idle, twiddling our thumbs, and hoping that something changes on its own, nor is it about trying to force things to happen in our own strength as if we can manipulate the outcome ourselves. No, the kind of waiting I'm talking about is more like a child waiting for a long-promised gift. Have you ever seen the way a child waits when they know something good is coming? There's this sense of eager anticipation, isn't there? They know the gift is on its way, and while they wait, their excitement grows. It's not a passive kind of waiting. It's full of expectancy. And when the gift finally arrives, the joy is multiplied because of the waiting. Now think about that image for a moment. What would it look like for us to wait like that? To live in a state of expectation even when we don't yet see the restoration. It's a subtle shift, but it makes all the difference. It's the difference between waiting in frustration and waiting in hope. It's the difference between feeling like nothing is happening and trusting that even now, God is at work behind the scenes. You might be thinking, but how can I wait with hope when everything feels so uncertain? How can I trust that something good is coming when all I see is brokenness? It's a fair question, and I don't pretend to have an easy answer. But I do know this. Throughout history, time and again, God has proven himself faithful. He is shown in the lives of countless people, including many of you, I'm sure, that he is always working, even when it seems like nothing is happening. Consider the story of a man I once knew. He had been waiting for years to see the restoration of his family. There had been a falling out, a deep rift, and despite his best efforts, the relationship seemed irreparably damaged. For a long time, he felt like nothing was changing, but he didn't give up hope. He kept praying, kept trusting that somehow God would restore what was broken. And then one day, seemingly out of nowhere, the walls began to come down. Healing began to take place, slowly but surely. The restoration came, not because of anything he did to force it, but because he trusted in God's timing and continued to live in hope. Living in hope doesn't mean ignoring the reality of our circumstances. It doesn't mean pretending that everything is fine when it isn't. But it does mean that we hold on to the belief that restoration is possible even when we can't see how it will happen. It means we trust that the God who created us, the God who loves us, is always working, even in the darkest moments. And this kind of hope isn't passive, it's active. It means that while we wait, we continue to live with purpose. We continue to take steps forward in faith even when the path isn't clear. We continue to love, to serve, to care for those around us, knowing that our lives have meaning even in the waiting. We plant seeds trusting that in time they will grow. We build even when the foundation seems shaky. We keep moving forward, not because we have all the answers, but because we trust the one who does. I think of it like tending a garden. Have you ever planted a seed and then anxiously watched, waiting for it to sprout? There's a period where it seems like nothing is happening. Days, sometimes weeks pass, and the soil looks the same, bare, unmoving. But beneath the surface, things are happening. The seed is taking root. It's preparing to grow, even though you can't see it yet. And then one day, a small shoot breaks through the surface. It's only the beginning, but it's a sign that the restoration is coming. In the same way, God's work in our lives often takes place beneath the surface, out of sight. We may not see the progress right away, but that doesn't mean it's not happening. And this is where faith comes in. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. It's the trust that God is working, even when we can't see it yet. It's the belief that restoration is not just a possibility, but a certainty, because the one who promised it is faithful. But how do we cultivate this kind of faith? How do we live in hope when everything around us feels uncertain? One of the most powerful ways, I believe, is by remembering by looking back on the times when God has already shown himself faithful in your life. Think about those moments when things seemed hopeless, and yet somehow restoration came. Maybe not in the way you expected, but in a way that brought healing, growth, and new life. When we remember God's faithfulness in the past, it strengthens our hope for the future. I'm reminded of a friend who, after years of struggling with a debilitating illness, finally experienced healing. It wasn't immediate, and it didn't come in the way he thought it would. But as he looks back now, he can see how, even in the hardest moments, God was preparing him for something greater. His healing came slowly, but when it did, it brought with it a new depth of gratitude and compassion that he never would have had if he hadn't walked through the struggle. That no matter how long it takes, no matter how dark things may seem, God is always working toward restoration. Our job, in the meantime, is to live in expectation, to keep our hearts open, our eyes attentive, and our hands ready to receive the restoration when it comes. And remember, living in expectation doesn't mean we have all the answers. Doesn't mean we understand every twist and turn. But it does mean that we trust the process, that we trust the one who holds the process. It means we wake up each day, not with despair, but with a quiet confidence that something good is coming. Even when the world feels broken, even when the pieces don't seem to fit, we live with the assurance that the story isn't over. What would it look like for you to live in expectation today? What would it look like for you to wait? Not with frustration, but with hope. Maybe you're in the middle of a situation that feels impossible. Maybe the restoration hasn't come yet. But I encourage you, don't give up hope. Don't close your heart to the possibility that something beautiful is being woven together, even now. And now, as we bring our reflections to a close, let us lift our gaze from the everyday struggles of our lives to something far greater. We've spoken of personal restoration, of broken hearts being mended, of fractured dreams finding new life. But there is something even larger at play. It is not just about the restoration of you or me as individuals. There is a grand restoration in progress, something woven into the very fabric of time and existence. And we are part of it. What would it mean if everything you see, the beauty, the pain, the chaos, was part of a much larger story, one that ends not in despair, but in redemption? We live in a world where brokenness is so apparent, it's almost easy to miss the signs of hope. But if we're honest with ourselves, even in the darkest moments, something within us longs for a different ending. It's almost as if we were made for it. Why is that? Why, in the face of so much brokenness, do we instinctively believe that things could be made right? Perhaps this deep yearning, this unshakable belief in a better ending, is not just wishful thinking, but a reflection of something. What if this longing for wholeness, this desire for everything to be restored, points to a reality beyond ourselves? Could it be that what we feel in our hearts is a glimpse, a whisper of a future where all that is broken is made whole again? Imagine for a moment a world where every wrong is made right, where every tear is wiped away. A world where justice flows like a river, where love reigns, and where suffering no longer has a place. It's not a fairy tale. It's not some distant hope with no basis in reality. It is the promise that has been echoed throughout the ages, whispered by prophets, sung by poets, and etched into the hearts of every human being. This is the ultimate restoration, the restoration of all things. You might ask, but how can we hold on to this hope in a world so full of pain? How can we believe in such a grand restoration when everything seems to be falling apart? And I understand. It's hard to reconcile the brokenness of the world with the promise. But let me offer this. What if the very brokenness you see, the fractures in the world, are not evidence of a world beyond repair, but signs that the restoration is already beginning? Think about it. Throughout history, there have been moments when everything seemed lost, when the world seemed too broken to ever be healed. And yet, in those very moments, incredible transformations took. Light broke into the darkness. Healing emerged from unimaginable pain. What if the darkness we see now is just the prelude to something far greater? What if the brokenness we experience is not the end of the story, but the beginning of the ultimate? Let me remind you of a simple truth. No matter how deep the loss, no matter how shattered the pieces may seem, Restoration is always possible. And not just for you or me, but for the world. One day, every bit of suffering, every loss, every tear will be gathered up and woven into something beautiful. We are not moving toward destruction. We are moving toward wholeness. This is not to say that the process is easy. Far from it. The waiting can be long. The pain can feel unbearable. But here's the thing, restoration takes time. And the grand restoration, the one that encompasses all of creation, is unfolding even now, though we may not always see it. Sometimes it feels like the world is unraveling. But remember the seed we talked about earlier, the one planted in the dark soil, seemingly forgotten? Restoration works like that, often hidden, often slow, but always moving forward. So what do we do while we wait for this great restoration? We live with hope. We live with anticipation. We keep our hearts open and our hands ready, knowing that the day will come when everything is made new. The cracks in the world, the brokenness in our lives, they're not signs of defeat. They're the very places where the light of restoration begins to shine. Here's the beautiful truths. The restoration we long for, the restoration of all things, is not some distant fantasy. It's not just a wish. It's a promise. One day, the world will be restored. One day, all that is broken will be made whole again. One day, we will see with our own eyes the fulfillment of that promise. Every scar, every wound, every loss will be redeemed. My friends, let this hope take root in your hearts. Hold on to it with both hands, because the restoration is coming. No matter how dark things may seem, no matter how deep the loss, the story isn't over. The ultimate restoration is nearer than we think, and we are all part of it. So as we go from here, may we live in the light of that promise. May we live as people who know that the brokenness of today is not the end. May we walk with faith, knowing that the ultimate restoration is coming, and when it comes, it will be more beautiful, more complete, more glorious than anything we could have ever imagined. God is the restorer of all things. And in the end, everything will be made whole again.